Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. With most of the dead hostages finally back home for burial, the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan is reaching its conclusion, meaning that decisions regarding what's next on the agenda are now imminent. Once the fate of the 150 or so Hamas terror operatives currently besieged in a Rafah tunnel is resolved, and the remaining 4 bodies have been returned, preparations for an American-led international stabilization force can then move ahead. However, there are still many questions surrounding this issue, such as the exact makeup of this force, locations and missions still to be defined, and what role exactly will Turkey play, having leverage over the Islamist Hamas but being hostile towards Israel. So is the disarmament of Hamas and a significant weakening of their grip over the Gaza Strip on the near horizon per President Donald Trump's plan? Joining us to dissect these matters include Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a military diplomat and a cross-cultural strategist, among a long list of others. It's good to see you, Colonel.
Shalom, Jonathan.
Also joining us is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs in the United States, also formerly in CENTCOM, among others. It's great to see you, General.
Great to see you, Jonathan.
And with us here in the studio, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Emil Oren. Emil, nobody really wants to deal with Gaza. That is something that is quite apparent with whomever you speak to, and it is quite the Pandora box, so to speak. But nonetheless, let's give it a go. What are we to expect in the near future with the high hopes of seeing, of course, all of the hostages who were murdered brutally by the Islamist Hamas on October 7th of 2023 returned home?
For totally opposite reasons, both Hamas and Israel are not eager to move from the first phase to the second one. For Hamas, the second phase, meaning having to disarm, or at least to start disarming, there is this idea of a pilot program in the Rafah area and then gradually moving to other regions of the Strip. But obviously, once the various nations and organizations dealing with the stabilization decide that this is time to move on, they have to start disarming. Israel, on the other hand, knows that part of what Saudi Arabia and others will demand as their price for taking part in the ISF will have to do with some path towards Palestinian nationhood. And therefore, because this is domestically untenable for Netanyahu, he wouldn't like to get there so early in the game.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Colonel Ben Shalom, I'd like to start with you, talking about the CMCC. What can you tell us about that, and to what degree are we optimistic about the stages ahead?
Well, the CMCC, you notice that every campaign, every war, we have another mechanism with another acronym, but it's always the same idea. It's sitting side by side and coordinating and trying to move forward with a combined task. Here, of course, there are many more complexities because it's not only U.S.-Israeli interests, but really regional interests, international interests. And we see the United States not as siding with us here, not at all, but all of us together trying to move forward with Gaza. I think the mechanism, and I say I think, Jonathan, because I wasn't there and I'm not serving now, but the idea is they're standing up the mechanism to enable in the future to combine whatever we will have, because notice that we still don't know what the forces are. We just spoke now about the complexities. I think the different players have different terms and conditions that some of them cannot be met. At this phase, I'll just say that I like the plan. The plan in general, most Israelis could say, sure, the vision there is wonderful. The problem is that Hamas will never sign on to that vision, and all the rosy words of peace and moving forward after this long conflict, I think we're still long from that.
Indeed. Well, I'd like to ask you, General Kimmett, since, as Colonel Ben Shalom says, and justifiably so, Hamas is most likely not going to sign up for the 21-point plan that President Trump presented, despite claiming initially under duress, so to speak, since it was truly faced by high military pressure during Israel's maneuver in Gaza City. Uh, President Trump is not expecting to be happy with any rejection of his plan, and Israel remains committed that unless Hamas does so willingly, namely accept President Trump's plan, Israel will restart the engines of war.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jonathan, and I think that's where it's going to end up. Look, let's be clear. There's very little chance of a true stabilization force going inside of Gaza. Uh, it doesn't look like the United Nations has an appetite for it. Doesn't look like necessarily there's the mechanisms for a peace support, peace enforcement, stabilization force, blue helmet force, whatever you want to call it. I don't see the countries lining up for that. I think what I'm most concerned about is that the new line that has been established, that area that Israel has taken in Gaza, will sort of become the new normal, will sort of become the new line. And what we have inside of Gaza from there is sort of a shrunken Gaza, which in many ways could very well lead to some sort of anarchy inside there, some sort of Lord of the Flies types of scenario. But until there's a little more leadership shown throughout, and I think it's going to take more American involvement, not less, I don't see this really kicking off in a way that's satisfactory to the goals that are trying to be achieved. I'm not talking about simply Hamas disarming. I mean, I think that's a fantasy for another world. I'm talking about the simple issue of public security, public safety, a foundation for a governance mechanism inside Gaza, whether it's the old Gaza or the new Gaza. So it certainly seems to me, as an old Marine once told me, a lot like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. There's really nothing going on here.
Hmm. Well, Mr. Owen, one of the rationales that was put forth to me in one of my discussions with people dealing with this issue is that Hamas is likely giving up the hostages since it realized at some point that that was its way out, on the one hand, from being totally with the back against the wall, but on the other hand, it's also a type of lever within the international sphere where it could say and apply as such also pressure against Israel that Israel doesn't have the justification to prolong its war and the suffering of the Palestinian people since it's no longer holding hostages. Those calculations were obviously put into the broader risk calculation, but nonetheless, Israel is more than happy to receive the hostages back and deal with the brunt of international pressures later. Do you see a scenario in which this could get out of hand, so to speak?
You know, we have seen so many twists in this plot. Now the shoe or the boot is on the other foot. Now we have 150 or so hostages. We don't know them. We don't know whether they are armed. We will know who they are if we let them go into Gaza, but through our checkpoints, be identified, be photographed, their details being taken, their compatriots will suspect that they have been recruited by Israeli intelligence, which may not be the case, but it will sow suspicion. So we can still get a lot out of these besieged, who are like the Japanese in the jungles after World War II, because there is no chain of command, no command and control between Hamas in Gaza and this tunnel. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And then simultaneously with the stabilization force, there should be this technocratic government, which is part of Trump's plan. this is not yet in the cards either.
Well, let me just explain this to our viewers for a moment, since I think it's important to understand. As part of Trump's plan, the IDF withdrew to a certain agreeable location. It's established some yellow line, so to speak. It did not necessarily deploy along the yellow line, but rather roughly a mile away on most of those locations where the yellow line exists, for ensuring that the territories where the IDF is deployed are indeed defensible lines from its perspective. And during the course of the cessation of hostilities from when it was brought into force to date, the Islamist Hamas had roughly between 130 to 150 terror operatives holed up in a underground subterranean infrastructure, a type of tunnel, and it's been disconnected from the Islamist Hamas HQ, so to speak, or the territories that are currently under Hamas control, and they are pretty much with literally with the back against their wall in all intents and purposes. No access to water or food or anything from the outside for the long term, and unable to exit the tunnels for fear of being captured by the IDF, which is in line with the terms and conditions of the 21-point plan by the Trump administration. And on that, Colonel Ben Shalom, in the event that Israel would, in accordance with a request by Qatar and the Islamist Hamas and Turkey at that, for the state of Israel to release those Hamas terror operatives, to grant them safe passage, so to speak, into Hamas-controlled territory. On the one hand, it would show goodwill, which is something that Qatar is lobbying the United States for right now. But on the other hand, it would create a unprecedented situation for Israel, which would undoubtedly bring an end to Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, since parties within his coalition would never agree for something like this to happen.
Yes, so complex. And remember that the political aspects here have been dominant throughout the war. There are many things that there could even have been consensus, but the government can't do because the base won't allow it. Sometimes even much narrower than the base. Israelis will understand what I'm talking about. And here, I mean, if you'd ask me personally, I think that we're not at war now, or we don't want to be at war. We finished the phase of armed conflict. Now we should be in the phase of stabilization, rehabilitation, disarmament of Gaza, the diplomatic track, and again, this beautiful vision of Trump's plan. If we really would have been there, personally, I would have no problem with releasing these terrorists back, because if we're not at war, we're not after them to kill each and every one of them now. And I would use this and I would leverage this with our partners, led by the United States, because that's really a tactical issue. Remember, if you read the words of the plan, then Hamas terrorists who relinquish, their goal of fighting Israel, put down their weapons, we're not supposed to touch them. The war is over. But is the war over? So as long as we're really in the last phases of the war and using it as leverage, I can understand what the parties are saying. But if you ask me, I wish we could move to the second part, have them released, and really go to dismantling the infrastructure of terror in Gaza. But again, unfortunately, I don't think we're there.
Well, I completely agree with you. We're not there, to put it mildly, since we're still in phase one. Hamas has broken the terms of the 21-point plan 72 hours into the ceasefire, when it failed to release all of the deceased hostages, or the remains of the deceased hostages, since it claimed not to know where they are. Of course, the moment Israel informed the United States where they are, immediately Hamas said, "Oh, right, we knew that already," and went and recovered those bodies. But that's already for another discussion. General Kimmett, I'd like to hear your take on this, because we're not in phase two, and quite frankly, without the threat of armed conflict, namely the reigniting of the hostilities from an Israeli perspective, Hamas would continue to do whatever it wants, wouldn't it?
Well, I think you're right. And I mean, it just is an outstanding question about how to kickstart this process. Any notion of saying using the 150 prisoners or terrorists that are down in the tunnels as some sort of leverage and trade bait for disarmament Hamas, of course, won't work. They would be more than happy to have those guys held prisoners by the Israelis for years and years. But this notion that they're going to give up their guns, I think is just ridiculous. We're seeing the same thing in Iraq, by the way, where the factions there are unwilling to disarm as well. So you're pretty much stuck in a hard place, between a rock and a hard place right now. How do you move to the next step? I unfortunately believe that Colonel Ben Shalom is exactly right. It's more of a political issue right now for Prime Minister Netanyahu. And since that's the only area where there seems to be any ability for the international community to influence, I think you're going to see a significant amount of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to make some concessions to the 20-point plan, because nobody else is going to make some concessions. Unfortunately, there is that same situation that the Colonel properly laid out, which is that may be what the international community wants, but it's certainly not what President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu wants, base wants. And candidly, the standard answer is I answer to my people, I don't answer to the international community. So I think we really are stuck at top dead center right now at phase one. And sadly, unless Israel decides to go back to war to try to move this process along a little bit more, I see the absence of a willingness of the international community to provide a credible military structure to put inside of Gaza, the unwillingness of the international community to provide any type of agreed upon governance facility inside a governance mechanism inside of Gaza. We could be here for months.
Well, Mr. Owen, governance cannot prevail unless you have a viable security force or stabilization force, so to speak. In this context, naturally, Hamas is not very keen on relinquishing its governance and is going to make it hard on any international actor, let alone Western actors that require, under their democratic systems, a UN Security Council resolution to enact upon some type of peace mission or a mandated type of structure. What can be done in the context of Gaza at this moment in time when there is unwillingness and it's quite apparent, while at the same time countries are very hopeful to see this succeed?
You know, regardless of the political objections, some of them are justified regarding the Turkish involvement. One is almost tempted to let Turkish troops go into Gaza. They are not known for their
Almost.
tender, loving care.
Almost.
Yes, the last time they were there in late 1917, when they were in Palestine in general, they were quite ruthless and given a mandate to impose their will on the Gazans, including Hamas, even though, of course, on the ideological and religious planes, they are their brethren. Nevertheless, should they be given an order, they will not be too gentle. However, the most overused cliche is the day after. One remembers that it started with the depiction of World War III in the movies. The day after the nuclear exchange, what happens to the planet. But in our context, of course, it's the diplomatic day after the war. It hasn't started yet with Israel because of what you and Reuven Ben Shalom and Mark Kimmett described, because of the political obstacles. And therefore, Israel doesn't take any initiative. It is only reacting to what others initiate, be it Mohammed bin Salman, be it Erdogan, be it President Trump. So we are only bracing for whatever comes next without offering any alternative.
Well, Colonel Ben Shalom, let's zoom out a little bit. How are the Egyptians, which have a significant stake in the game here, obviously, acting within the context of bringing about some type of security stabilizing force of sorts, considering the fact that Cairo has relayed its objection to any Turkish involvement in Egypt? They've relayed this both to the Israelis and to the Americans. And as such, we're not expected to see Turkey there, but we do expect to see someone there, and it doesn't seem like anybody is lining up.
That's a good question. Of course, we want to see the whole branch of the Middle East that is aligned with moving forward positively, which means not the Muslim Brotherhood. If we enable Turkey and Qatar to be the leading force in the Gaza Strip, that ideology, and by the way, on the short term, it could be stabilization and rebuilding, it could look nice, but that would mean Hamas staying in power, and it would mean that the most important thing here, the ideology, the education, will continue to be fueling this narrative of the destruction of Israel. You asked specifically about Egypt. We have a good dialogue with Egypt, and we many times see things eye to eye and good coordination, despite a lot of what you see in the media. And I'm not talking about the masses, that will take another 100 years, but governments to government, and especially militaries. We want to see peace, stability, security. Of course, their concerns with Gaza make a lot of sense. They're on their border. And I think relating to what Amir Oren said, we need to be proactive. But a lot of this is neutralizing these political issues. The most important thing you've asked me is the issue of the Palestinian Authority. It's in the document, it's in the plan, just the Israeli government can't accept it. We should have the right rhetoric, the right push forward. And it doesn't have to be establishing tomorrow a Palestinian country, of course, or giving them sovereignty, but giving the hint, the possibility, the path, the horizon, the hope in the words of this document. And I think Israel can be more proactive on that.
Well, I've read the document, and the document does indeed specify the Palestinian Authority needing to undergo a reform if it were to play any type of role in the future governance of Gaza or anywhere else at that. And at the same time, the document also does take note of the Palestinian aspiration for statehood. It does not commit to any type of process to that end. It does commit to reigniting a political process that would be ultimately determined by a negotiated solution by both sides rather than any predetermined conclusion. So there are a lot of nuances there, but nonetheless, we don't have very much time left, and I still would like to ask you, General Kimmett, America is not naive. It sees what's on the table. It sees the challenges on the ground. What are we to expect next?
Well, I think what's going to happen is President Trump is going to give his typical period of patience. And then once he gets to the point where nobody's moving, he will make a somewhat dramatic change in some way or the other. There's one thing that President Trump does not like, and that is when he's put something out there, he expects that process to move along. And if it doesn't move along and if it hits a roadblock, he's going to bring the bulldozers out and he's going to send the bulldozers through that roadblock. I think what we're seeing, candidly, and I know we only have a couple of moments, but we keep talking about this issue about security versus stability. I saw that many times in Iraq. I remember walking down the hallway and hearing the civilian coordinator arguing with the military commander, one saying, I can't get stability until you establish security. And the military commander saying, I can't establish security until we have stability. These guys are going to continue to fight unless you've got some jobs for them. And the civilian coordinator says, I can't promise them jobs until we have a safe and secure environment. So it's just the problem that you're going to continue to see inside of Gaza. I think President Trump is going to have a little bit of patience with this, but I think we need to start opening up our ears because I kind of hear the sound of bulldozer engines being started up in the next few weeks.
As the old saying goes, keep the soldiers busy or you'll get a riot at hand. In 25 seconds each, closing sentence. Mr. Owen, we start with you.
Yeah, I like the metaphor that General Kimmett used. The bulldozers, those which tore down the East Wing, can tear down the Middle East. And President Trump's prestige is on the line. He is the chairman of the Board of Peace. He wouldn't like this deal to unravel.
Colonel Ben Shalom.
You said the Americans are not naive. Yes, they are sometimes. And a lot of this plan is being naive, even though I think it was the right thing to do at the time. It pushed us very forward with the hostages, which was very important.
General Kimmett.
I agree with Colonel Ben Shalom. Naivety is rampant throughout this entire plan, but experience of the last 30 years of the United States negotiators trying to make things better there, I think at this point, given a choice between naivety and experience, I'll choose naivety.
Well, if we want to bring about peace in a region that has not experienced it for 3,000 years, we might have to wait another 3,000 years, or as some may say, me included, until the Prince of Peace returns. With that, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Kimmett, Colonel Ben Shalom, and Mr. Amir Oren for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. From here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.